Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Welcome to GMAT Day, panel number 1, how to start your GMAT prep right. I'm here with 4 of my very, very favorite experts in the GMAT world. Sunita Singhvi, a verbal expert at GMAT Wiz. Jeff Miller, most of you have seen him on GMAT Club events before. So he's the head of instruction at Target Test Prep. Rajat Sandana, co-founder of eGMAT, really focused on curriculum design, been doing it as long as anybody out here. And Chris Gentry, test prep instructor for all sorts of tests. So he knows GMAT, GRE, LSAT, SAT, all this stuff. And he's a curriculum designer over at Manhattan Prep. All right, if you're watching us live, please pop in with your questions about how to get started on GMAT Prep. And I'll try to even out the participation among these 4 because they're all really smart and I want to hear them talk equally. I'm going to start with a really general question. Toss it at Sunita first. So how important do you think it is for test takers to develop a personalized study plan early in their prep? And how do you go about doing that? What should they be thinking about as they start out designing that plan for themselves?
Well, for me, a personalized study plan, PSP as I call it in short, is very, very important. It's like a student is a ship. Without a PSP, it's a rudderless ship. You're out there, you're drifting here and there, you're not going to reach your goal. So in short, if you want to reach your target score, you have to have a PSP. Now, how you're going to prepare that will depend on 2 things. Are you a fresher? Are you a retaker? Some of the factors will be common, but I do believe that if you're a fresher, there are certain kinds of research that you have to do before you even think of preparing a PSP. You might not be familiar with things. If you're a retaker, then there are factors that you have to consider, and then you have to build up a personalized study plan. So it's very, very important so that you allocate the right amount of time to the right areas to reach your right score in the right time. So for me, PSP is very, very important. That's a question about the importance of the plan. Now, how you're going to go about preparing it, as I said, depends on multiple factors. So are you a working professional? Do you have time foundations, or you're studying already somewhere? So how much time you have available? What are the resources you've already utilized, or about the resources? Then what are your strengths and weaknesses? If you already know them. If you're a retaker, I would say then post that we are also talking about your learning pace and style. Everybody learns in a different way. You cannot generalize that. So do you know that about yourself? All these factors and many more probably you need to take into account before you set up a routine for yourself. And the routine should be very realistic. People set up very unrealistic goals right at the beginning. Oh, I'm going to study 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day. I'm going to study 8 hours a day. Oh, some even have said I study the whole day. And that's where I think, you're just doing it too much. That's not the kind of plan we need.
And Sunita, it's funny, we have, if you're watching this live, please ask your questions in the Q&A section, upvote the ones you like. There's one that is blowing all the other ones away in terms of votes, and it kind of speaks to what you were just saying, Sunita, about, people get really excited and study all day. So how to extract enough time to study if you're working full time? So how do you balance these things? And so anybody who wants to hop in on this, feel free.
Yeah, I can shed some light on that. So that is a popular question. We hear it a lot. I think the key is everything's personable to the particular student in question, right? I mean, you can go out there and you can ask advice, and certainly we've written articles and posted videos about how to best deal with, studying with a demanding job, but you got to really sit down. It can't be one of those things where you're like, well, I work 10 hours a day, or I work crazy investment banker's hours, so I'll just figure it out. You really got to sit down and you got to look at everything. You got to look at your work schedule, your family responsibilities, and then the things that are kind of in the peripheral and say, well, okay, some of these are going to be put aside. GMAT's going to come to the forefront, but I'm going to literally put pen to paper, or however you do it, and say, all right, on Mondays, I'm studying from 5:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. Tuesdays, okay, I have a shorter work day, so I'm going to stay at the office and study from 7 to 9. Whatever it is, you got to do it. You got to write it down and you got to commit to it, because it is so easy to fall out of the GMAT study prep schedule thing, because you're like, well, man, I really want to go to happy hour, or man, I had a crappy day at work, so why would I want to study? So yeah, sit down, make a study for your schedule for yourself. I tell people if they can do it, 18 hours a week is a nice clean number. I get it. It's a lot. That's 2 hours Monday through Friday, 4 hours each weekend day. I mean, I did it back in the day, so I know it's possible. but you got to just weigh it with all the other things you have kind of going on in your life.
I think we
Yeah,
want to just, sorry, Chris, did you want to go?
Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for that, by the way. So I think one of the things you can really do, the tools that are available today. So one of the tools that I recommend students to really do is something called Toggle. It's a time tracker tool. Let's say take 3 to 4 days that you have, track everything that you do. So it's a beautiful tool that tells you where you're spending time. And essentially adding to what Jeff is saying, that'll tell you where you've been spending time, and it'll help you identify where you can take time out. For example, your time may be divided into 6 or 7 different sections, and Toggle will allow you to really say, hey, maybe those 90 minutes that I usually spend, cleaning my house and cooking and all of those things, maybe there's a way I can outsource some of that work and optimize on it. Maybe I can cook for the week if that's something that you're doing. So you've got to take out a time where you'd say, these are my high intensity intervals. This is where I'm going to spend my learning. And then again, I recommend taking a slot out every day, just as what Jeff has said. And then you also have to have what I call as my revision time slots. So maybe during lunchtime, all you're doing is revision. You're not doing something new. And that way you're cementing that learning. But having that data-driven approach where you know where you're going to take time out, A, and B, communicate what you won't be able to do. I mean, it's really important to tell your boyfriend, girlfriend, parents, friends that you won't be able to spend a certain amount of time with them, and tell them why the GMAT's important for you or why an MBA is important for you to begin with. I think that's getting that buy-in is the first thing you need.
Yeah, and Rajat had a really good point that I just want to expand on. Studying doesn't just have to be when you're sitting at your desk, like here, I'm at my desk, my computer's open, I'm doing it. You got to really find pockets of time during the day. And this is where like things like flashcards and things that you can do. I mean, I'm probably dating myself, of course, but like back when I was doing GMAT studying in 2007, right? I remember this so clearly. I'm on the subway in New York. I've got my flashcards in my pocket in the dead of winter, and I'm pulling them out to study on a commute to work. Yes, things have changed. We have smartphones now. I had a very archaic BlackBerry back then. But the point is, take that time. If you're sitting at the doctor's office in line, waiting for your car to get serviced, whatever it is, have stuff available so you can do your prep in little pockets of time that aren't just those big chunks when you're sitting down at your desk doing your quote unquote true studying.
I just want to add something very, very specific to it. If you're going to study for the GMAT, one investment I can recommend making is buy noise cancelling headphones. Good noise cancelling headphones. It helps isolate you from the world, and that focus mode that you go in while learning. I think that the ROI of that is tremendous.
And you have those in the test. If you're taking the test in a test center, they give you noise canceling headphones. So it's something that's
they're not going to be as good.
They're not as good. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Let me
Quality in the test center.
Yes.
Yeah. To be fair, Rajat, absolutely.
And the other thing is iterate. So I think you can't really say I'm going to study 2 hours a day or 20 hours a week on week 1. Got to have that as a goal. Maybe in week 1 you get to 14, and tracking that's really important, and iterating. So maybe I was able to do this on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday and Friday, not on Monday. Figure out why not on Monday, and then maybe not put that time if you can't take it out. But having the wrong expectation is one of the worst things you can have.
All right. There's a question about that I know all of us have gotten from people who are just getting started with their prep, looking for a plan, and they say, well, how many months do I need to prep? And they're trying to carve that time out of their life. And Rajat, I think that's sort of a relative of kind of what you were saying, where it's like, hey, figure out what your time actually looks like, then figure out where to slot in the GMAT. On the broader scheme of months and maybe a year, I think students start out trying to figure that out. How do you think about that? So when somebody comes to you and says, well, hey, I'm at a 550 and I want to get a 700, how many months am I going to have to study for? I guess, what would your answer be to that? And I'll lead off with Jeff and then go around to each of you.
Sure. Great question. Popular question, right? Because everybody wants timelines now, because we're all busy. But usually a good rule of thumb is about a 6-month timeline, right? But when you carve it into months, then that's the macro. If the micro is, well, I'm studying 30 minutes a day, it's like, well, then it's not going to be 6 months. And then part of it is kind of your personal journey from beginning to end. How well are you learning what you need to learn? And are you speeding up as you learn those things and getting better? And is your prep becoming more efficient? And are you effectively going back and reviewing things from past topics? Because if in week 17 you haven't seen anything from week 3, most humans are going to forget those things. That's just the way this thing works. So it's kind of an iterative process. And so, yeah, I could say about 6 months, but the thing that I always tell GMAT students is you need a plan A, B, and C, right? Because if your plan A doesn't pan out, you need to be in line to do plan B. So if your apps are in September and that's when you are dead set on applying, you don't want to start your GMAT prep in June or May. You want to start it, as you said, Charles, maybe a year before, because who cares if you're done 4 months before the GMAT? And furthermore, as a side note, I talk to a lot of students who are seniors in college who, are probably going to take their GMAT and save it. And I'm always a proponent of that, because as you age and as you get older, the amount of responsibilities that you start having post-college, they increase over time for most people. So if you can knock that out, and I say this to everybody who asks, you're going to be the happiest person alive. You're going to be in your office doing cartwheels while everybody else is hunkering down with their GMAT prep materials. So yeah, it's something to definitely start early.
You're better off doing it too early than too late, I think, is the essence of what you're saying, Jeff. Chris, sorry about all the tech issues. It sounds like you're back. I'll go ahead and fire this one at you, and then we'll move on to another question. So what we were just talking about is when we get students that show up, so we had this whole conversation about fitting GMAT into your crazy busy life kind of on a scheduled basis of the day-to-day. But usually when students walk in the door and say, hey, I want to gain 50 points, 100 points, 150 points, whatever it might be, they say, well, hey, how many months of prep do I need? And I guess what kind of answer do you give to that? Or for somebody self-studying, how do you help them think about what they might need in order to get to their goal?
I would say general rule of thumb is probably 2 months of prep per 50 points you want to increase, just to sort of provide a metric to that. Now, that's a very rough estimate, and I think Rajat may be making a face expression that he doesn't necessarily disagree.
No, I was still stuck with where Jeff was saying, hey, I'm gonna get done with the GMAT and I'm gonna do cartwheels, and I was like, which office is that? But
good job. It's the home office. It's the home office.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where you really have to analyze why you don't have the score you want yet. Because there are two things that are holding you back from the score you want. One is the habits you implement in the test. The other is core content knowledge. And basically, you have to figure out which one is holding you back. And if it's both, you're going to have to do a lot more time. You may have all of the content knowledge in the world, but if you time out and leave 4 questions unanswered in a section, that's going to eviscerate your score. And so that's a habit issue that needs to be fixed. And so you need to first assess, am I working on content, habit, or both? Now, if it's habit, depending on the type of person you are, habit can be fixed very often within a month. You just need to say, I need to get used to the timer. I need to get used to looking at a problem and saying, no, this is not going to be worth the time. I'm going to click and enter, get out, and go to problems that are worth the time. Content areas, if you just need solid core content, you're just going to have to allot at least a minimum of 1 week per content area that you got to get down, and then give yourself at least 3 to 4 weeks to come back to those content areas and review them later. And so the idea is you count up how many content areas you need. You basically said, this is the number of weeks I need just for content. Then I'm going to need at least 3 to 4 weeks after I've done with that to do mixed sets on those content areas again, and make sure that I have those areas not in a focused setting, but when I'm looking at saying, I don't know what necessarily is coming next, can I recognize it, implement the strategies here, and then come back? And so you've got to allot those weeks just for content. And then you'll also have to make sure that you have time to develop habits. So you want at least 3 weeks where you can take 1 practice test a week, and then look at that practice test, go through it problem by problem by problem, and saying, what decisions was I making? Which decisions were good decisions? How was I working pen to paper and putting my thoughts on paper in the most efficient way possible? And that's how you build your time frame. I will say that I normally never see people do it in less than 3 months, and I normally don't see people take longer than 8.
And Chris, if I can pin you down to one piece of that, and we can kind of ask everybody for their opinions on it. We were getting questions about when to take practice exams and when to introduce those into the process. So I guess, Chris, it sounds like you're advocating generally you're going to do that a little bit later on in the process. I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit more.
Thank you. You want to take 1 practice test immediately. You need to know where your weaknesses are. You need to take 1 practice test immediately, but then your next practice test probably won't be for at least 4 weeks. because you're going to need to spend time working from that first practice test and say, here are all of my weaknesses. Let's get at least 4 of those up. And then you'll take a next practice test. And so most people take a practice test once every 4 to 6 weeks for about 2 to 3 months. And then when you were about 1 month away from your official test date, you start to ramp that up and take 1 practice test each week.
And I see Rajat nodding vigorously.
Yes, I think a lot of
agreement.
what Chris said, I absolutely agree with it. I think logically what Chris was really talking about, expressing what you've learned in mixed quizzes, we call that test readiness. That's something that you have to now. A lot depends on the kind of system you're working with and what metrics does that system have. So I agree towards the end, you need to have those practice tests. Now, do you need to have those practice tests during your preparation after the first month? It depends on, I mean, if you have other ways to evaluate that, you're tracking your improvement, then you probably don't need a practice test, because echoing with what Chris says, let's say, on the GMAT, you have about 8 subsections if you look at subsectional abilities, right? So you have 4 in DI, 2 in Quant, 2 in verbal. And let's say you have to work on 4 out of those 8. You have to have significant ability development on 4 out of those 8. Then, and let's say you've developed ability in, let's say, 1 or 2 in that 1 month that Chris talked about. Now, if you take a practice test, then there's a possibility the 2 that you haven't developed your ability, that may be pulling your score down, because overall the tests are question adaptive within the section, and you may not see that improvement. So if you're willing to track that improvement, you want to do that in a more pristine environment. Now, once you're done with those other 4, then of course, towards the end, practice tests, I mean, they are a means to really say, can you express the ability that you've developed in a mixed environment? And that's the role that you have to play. So that's where I would rather have those practice tests when you're done with 7 out of those 8 subsections, not before that. Otherwise, I've seen students underperform in an area and then just switch their study plan, and that leads to more harm than good.
So I think something that's coming up a little bit here is sort of the, work on your weaknesses. So get that initial practice test, find out where you stand, get a sense of how large the task is ahead of you, get a sense of your weaknesses, start focusing in on your weaknesses, and then really use those practice tests for the most part once you're kind of showing what you've learned in an actual test environment. Related question that we're getting a lot of from the live group. And again, folks, if we haven't gotten to your question, you don't see it in that Q&A feed, please re-ask it, because I'm seeing some of them disappearing from the feed. Getting a lot of questions about error logs. So for example, we've got one on here, how to analyze the error logs in mock exams efficiently. So Sunita, maybe we can have you take this on. So how do you advise using an error log, and without having it be such a massive administrative task to input every little thing? What's the right balance of spending time analyzing and actually spending time working on the weaknesses and using that data wisely and efficiently?
Right. So right at the beginning of the session, we spoke about a personalized study plan. So I think the other pillar, which is very important, is maintaining an error log, right? So if we are talking about, everybody here has been talking, and rightly so, about, okay, you learn the approach, you master the approach, you take practice tests to understand your progress, all of this, right? But then how does the error log figure into it, and what are you going to put in the error log? You want items which are going to be actionable, like insights on which you can actually do something, not just statistics, all right? So when I ask a student to make an error log, I give a sample of sorts. And what I do is, okay, you can have your question link, you can have your answer, correct answer, time taken. The time taken can be divided into 2 categories. Say, for example, if you're looking at a CR question, how much time you're spending on the stimulus and the question analysis, and how much time on the answer choice elimination. I do this. Why? Maybe we can go into that sometime later. So the timing factor, difficulty level, so that you can filter and understand which areas, what difficulty levels you're faltering on. All right. And then apart from this, so these are just, I would say these are numbers. The real part is you go through the solution of every question. Got it right, even then. Got it wrong, even then. So you need to know that if you have accepted an option as the correct option, you should know you have accepted it for the right reasons and not for the wrong reasons. If you have rejected an option, you should know that you have rejected it for the right reason and not the wrong reason. So there are 3 columns that I ask my students to make. 1, okay, after going through the solution, again, irrespective of whether you got the question right or wrong, you put down, all right, what you did wrong. Okay, so one column is what I did wrong. I'll come to the categorization in a moment, because what I did wrong can be a very broad thing. So what I did wrong, what I missed, second column. Now what I missed and what I did wrong could sometimes overlap, to be honest. So what I missed means something that I don't even do. It's not even right or wrong, I just don't do it. And then the final takeaway, what am I going to do about it? So these 3 columns are more important for me. And I ask a student that you formulate, if the student doesn't have, I give from my own end, you formulate a certain number of, let's say, kinds of misses and mistakes that are going to be there, so that you can filter and see what are the common things that you're doing. So any deviations from your approach, any, anything that you're doing wrong, and so that you can identify, why did I do this wrong? Why did I deviate here? Why was I not able to stick to this? And then you write on your takeaway. So when you're at the end of the week, when you're going through that entire error log, you should have a very good takeaway there. So this is when you're doing on your own. If you've got a tutor or somebody you're working with, that person can also go through that error log along with you. This is what I do with my students. And sometimes see beyond what they can see, to be honest. Again, this is from, you don't have to do this, but sometimes you might need that extra bit of advice. And that helps.
Good, Chris.
If I may add to that, in addition to that, there are fundamentally 2 types of wrong answers when you're looking at it from the point of view of a test taker. Questions you get wrong, and you're not surprised. You did not know what you were doing. You were going to get that question wrong. And then questions you got wrong, and you're like, how in the hell did I miss this question? I thought I knew exactly what to do here.
That's it.
And it's important to recognize that it's that second category, the ones where you're surprised you get it wrong. Those are the ones that are most likely indicating you've got a habit problem, that there's something that you're not writing down, that there's something that perhaps you are writing down in an incorrect way. They say, I need to fix that, because those are the ones that will really kill your score, because that's where you're going to spend the time in the test and still not get the reward for it.
I love it, Chris. I think you're spot on. So I'm kind of hearing two related things. And again, everyone studies differently. It's one of the things we need to point out at the very beginning of this conversation. Everyone studies differently. A lot of what you're doing as a self-studier, it's that journey of self-discovery to kind of figure out what makes you tick, when you underperform, when you perform well. So I'm kind of hearing 2 different things that you could add into your error log. One is sort of thinking, okay, every question I'm going to say, what did I miss? What did I do wrong? And really focus on it that way. Chris, I think what you're suggesting is related, but if it's a better way for you as an individual to organize it, you could think of it as, okay, I'm going to categorize my types of errors. This is one where I just got beat. Adaptive test, you're going to see really hard questions. If you're having a great test, the questions are going to get hard for you. And you should get beat. It's fine. It's okay not to know something. Go study it. That's fine. But there's questions where you got legitimately beat, questions where it was a habit issue, you shouldn't have missed it. And that can be a really useful mirror to hold up to your results, to kind of lead you to better performance on test day. Jeff, I can see you thinking. Fire away.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the wheels are turning. We always talk about the creation of an error log, and it seems good at first, right? Everything's clean and tidy, right? Everything looks great. And then all of a sudden we're 6-7 weeks into our prep and we're like, wow, this is a jumbled mess. So one of the biggest things is the maintenance of the error log, right? Because if you're practicing thousands of questions, and one of the things I've noticed GMAT students have a tendency to do is overdo things, right? Overdo their notes. So it takes them 4 hours to get through a chapter of something because they think everything is important. And while it's okay at first to really bring a lot into your error log, because these are probably legitimate errors, as these get corrected, you have to find a way to put them aside and not have to look at them every time you analyze your error log, because the idea of the error log is you're cleaning up those issues. So once those issues are clean and fixed, remove them, right? You can still keep a couple things, or maybe move them to a lesser pile, for lack of a better term, where you'll look at those later. But you can't be reviewing 2,000 questions every time you go in your error log. It's going to be demotivating. It's going to be one of those things you just don't want to do, and it's going to throw you off track. So just be very cognizant. Like, if you truly have something down, you have it down. If you got a rate question wrong because you thought that the average rate is rate 1 plus rate 2 divided by 2, And a week later, you know it's total distance over total time. You have that down. Get it out of there. Let the new fresh stuff come in and start to look at those things. And then you'll feel better about reviewing and dealing with your error log as you move forward.
All right, we got a little bit.
One other point of
quickly, Rajat.
So to what Chris said, so the behavioral part, absolutely agreed with that. That's, I think, the easiest way to get to improve your score right then and there, because behavioral issues, especially when you are towards the later part of your prep, the second half of your prep, you can fix them because the concepts are already there. The other thing which is there is this error log also has to be specific to a subsection. I mean, if it's in critical reasoning on the behavioral side, if you're not reading the conclusion properly, you've got to make sure that you do that. In critical reasoning, as difficult questions happen, there are people who get into the habit of not reading and visualizing the answer choice that's there. You've got to really say this behavioral issue and this specific aspect of it. Similarly, on data insights, owning the data set is an extremely important piece. If you didn't understand the data set, when to solving questions, got to write it down. It's a behavioral issue for a certain question. And I think that's that subsection specific error log. Again, the broad categories remain the same, but the sub aspects of it are specific to that subsection because the behaviors are specific to that subsection.
Yes, it could be that for a weakener question, you're constantly choosing a strengthener, for example. It just means if you lost track of your conclusion. Totally.
And Rajat, that was a perfect segue. One of the questions we're getting, and again, apologies if your questions are disappearing off the feed. Turns out that we're getting asked so many questions that we have overwhelmed the software. So working on getting that fixed. I'm trying to read them as fast as I can to kind of keep up with the ones that are getting asked the most frequently. So keep firing them away. We'll do our best. One of the questions we've seen a bunch of times is, okay, now that there are 3 sections on the GMAT that really matter instead of just 2 that really mattered before, how do you balance your time between those sections? And I think for this particular audience right now, more importantly, how do you think about that from the very start, where you're going, okay, do I focus on quant and verbal first and then add in data insights later? Am I doing those 3 equally? Am I focusing on my weaknesses first, ignoring my strengths? So I see Jeff's brain working again. So Jeff, what are your thoughts on kind of, for somebody who's just starting out, how should they think about balancing those 3 sections?
Yeah, so the data insights portion, I think, is a pretty easy decision. So as most test takers know who are in the thick of it, data insights takes a lot of what you're learning from math, from verbal, and it's kind of repackaging it. So we tell our students, save DI to the end, for sure. Because if you don't know about ratios or statistics, you're going to struggle in, TPA questions, some graphic interpretation questions. So you can save that. As far as math and verbal, you can kind of do them side by side. You can learn a math topic, say, linear and quadratic equations, and then follow it up with weaken the argument from verbal. So you're kind of ping-ponging back and forth between those topics. Because if you do all of quant and then you set it down and then you move to just verbal, and let's say that takes you a couple months, everything you learned in quant is going to slowly fade. So you got to be really careful about doing one and then the other. And going back to a point that Chris made earlier, this is why as you move through your prep, and I think Rajat said it too, is you start doing those mixed problem sets. Because if you're starting with your topical learning, which is like, I use that word so much in the learning of GMAT, eventually that has to bleed into mixed sets, because to learn it initially, you really hone in on that topic, a quant topic, a verbal topic, but then eventually you start bringing in those mixed sets so you can start to prepare yourself for how things are going to come to you on the GMAT. But then also it gives you little pockets of ways to say, oh, wait, I got this % greater question wrong. I learned that a couple weeks ago. I shouldn't have. And then, it's kind of rinse and repeating down the line with more problem sets like that.
Chris, if I make it quickly, Jeff said something like ping-ponging between topics. I want to point out that that's not recommended. That's required. For the way the brain learns, you have to have spaced repetition and come back to old topics frequently.
Right.
That's all I wanted to add to that.
So Chris, say a little bit more about spaced repetition, because I have a feeling a lot of viewers might not be familiar with that term.
So spaced repetition is just a term to take care of the fact that the brain, as I understand it, I am not a cognitive researcher, has essentially 3 types of memory. There's a working memory, a short-term memory, and a long-term memory. And even those terms are apparently outdated. But the brain won't transfer things into long-term memory unless it is forced to. And the way to force it to do that is to study something and then walk away from it for at least 48, 72 hours, and then come back to it later and do at least a few questions to come back and see that again. And you've got to set up a cycle where you see something, walk away, come back much later, see it again. That's the only way that you force your brain to actually put something in long-term memory.
I love it.
Yep. Agree.
Rajat, did you have
Yeah,
thoughts on balancing the three?
so I think just with what Jeff said, I think DI definitely for 80 to 90% of folks, DI would be towards the end after they're done with quant and verbal. The only exception is if you're already at that 80th percentile in quant and verbal and you're really low in DI, of course, start with DI because that's going to bridge the gap that you're looking for. That's the only exception, but for 80 to 90%. On Chris's statement with regards to the long-term memory, I think so it all depends on the system that you're working with. If you're purely working with books, then yes, you've got to do the spaced repetition. That's absolutely important. With the GMAT platform, what we have is a process, what we call as cementing, which essentially when you're going through the course, for example, in our CR course, you already work through about 450 odd questions going through the course. And then after that, you have a process called cementing, which ensures if you hit the metrics in cementing, it's there in the long-term memory. And then after that, you're doing test readiness. So after CR, you go to R. So you're doing test readiness there as well. So there is an aspect of spaced repetition. But for us, what we have found is, let's say you're someone who's starting your CR at a 30th percentile. Your goal is to get to that 85th percentile. Studying 2 weeks in a focused fashion, hitting the metrics there, helps you get there a lot faster.
Yes, I would agree with that totally.
And then as long as you cross those cementing metrics, you're not going to forget a whole lot of it. Maybe 5 to 7%, and that's something which you can get back within a few hours with spaced repetition. But you've got to cross that threshold of cementing. It's like if you're putting a wall up, if you don't do cementing, you've just put the bricks, and any lateral force is going to break that wall. If you cement it, it's going to be able to tolerate lateral forces. So again, it's a system that you're working with. If your system allows you to do that, then you can do focused effort and get those big areas out. So maybe you're weak in CR, maybe you're weak in GI and TA, maybe TPA, maybe probability in quant. You can be able to get those out up front. Then you can get into those other areas that where your foundation is there, where you have to fix a lot of behavioral issues.
I think just one thing to add to all of this, and in fact, each of you are, is correct in what you are saying. But since I've been doing, again, this is all my experience from private tutoring, is that students are different, like students are different. And what Rajat said, that if you've got a really weak area, if you're going to add something else to that weak area, and given that we are all, running short on time, sometimes students don't do so well on the learning part. I'm just talking about the learning part, So dedicating more time to a weak area, if it's a really, really very weak area, dedicatedly, and then running it parallel along to what else you want to add to it, which is where what Chris was saying makes more sense, because you're not boring yourself with the same thing again and again and again and again.
You can keep pressing 2 pieces of metal to one another for 2 years. Nothing's going to happen unless you apply heat. That heat is that
you need to focus.
You need that focused effort.
Something else I tell students a lot. Sorry, Charles, I'll make this quick. I promise. When a student comes to me and they're like, I've been banging my head against the wall with topic X, like number properties, and it's massive, right? Which it is. What can I do? And a lot of times I'll say, you know what? Put it down, move on, come back to it a few weeks later with maybe improved confidence, a refreshed head, where it's now this new and exciting topic that you're ready to tackle. And usually that works. So yeah, don't get stuck in the mud. You don't need to stick with a topic for 5 weeks if you're not getting it. Like, there's plenty to learn. So move on and come back. You just have to be agile with your preparation.
Another big question we're getting over and over and over, practice tests. And I'd actually love to go rapid fire through the group, because the question that we're seeing over and over, we're getting it from our students, is, okay, if I need more practice tests, obviously there's the MBA.com ones. Where else can I go for practice tests? What are their strengths and weaknesses? So I guess super briefly, give you about 30 seconds each. Sunita, if somebody needs extra practice tests, what are you recommending at this point? Extra tests beyond the MBA.com.
So if you're already going with a course provider, if you've already taken on a course, they would have their own mocks. You can add to that. If you haven't, if you're doing a self-prep, then I would say some of the mocks out there are pretty good. I would say GMAT's good, Manhattan's good, although Manhattan's really tough. I mean, they are to be honest, but they're very good practice. So I would say some of these stuff are really good, and students can add that, take those practice tests. We
Perfect.
also have our own practice tests, but yeah, you can take on those.
And Rajat, I'll go to you next. Anything to add to that? I think we might have lost
Yeah,
Chris
so
again.
we have our own mocks in addition to that, and I think if students need those beyond that, you have official mocks, which you can take a couple of times. I think if you add that up, you're looking at
it's too many. You don't need more than that.
you have 15, 17 mocks right there itself.
That's too many.
What are you trying to do is what I'm going to ask that student beyond that. So, I mean, honestly, 6 to 7 is the max I care about, and yeah.
But having said that, taking too many mocks is actually, I have at least seen that to be counterproductive. Like,
you don't want your mocks to be a study source.
You're not going to practice on your practice test. You're not going to practice on your practice test. That's your final frontier. You've done your practice, you've learned, you've mastered. Now then you're putting into, that's almost the exam that you're taking. So you can't keep taking the exam 15 times, and then people lose consistency. Actually, if you do it if you need to do it so many times.
So Jeff, thoughts on practice tests briefly?
Yeah, so GMAT offers 6. Rajat kind of pointed to this. You can retake the paid ones each once, so with fresh questions. So you're talking about
3 to 6, just to be very specific, 3 to 6. They have bigger, larger question banks.
Yeah, so you're talking about 9 tests. The reality is you shouldn't have exhausted all those. If you did, that means you weren't studying the right way from the very start. So I'm always reminding people that they can retake the MBA.com test. I'm also saying don't take them every weekend. You take one at the beginning, you save them to the end. That's more than enough. And if something's going wrong in between that time frame, then we have to have a much larger conversation, not about those practice tests, but about what the heck you're doing between beginning and end of your preparation.
Okay. So I guess we only have 2 minutes here, and then we'll wrap up. Want to wrap up on time, let everybody move on to the next event.
Yeah, I've got to go to the next session as well, yes.
Okay. Rajat, I guess real quick, if you can give one tip to somebody just starting out in one sentence, what's your one sentence for somebody that's brand new to the GMAT? What would you like them to think about?
I'd say don't think magic will happen in a week. Let me just say this.
A
lot of people say, and say, don't think magic will happen. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. Everyone improves at their own pace. As long as you feel you're learning something, and as long as you're focusing on learning, that's what matters. Nothing else matters. Whether someone takes the exam and aces the exam in a single attempt, others take about 3 to 4 attempts. It's immaterial. As long as you're learning, as long as you're improving, that's all that you need to worry about.
I love it, Rajat. We'll see you in the next one, Rajat.
Right,
Sunita, go for it. What's your one sentence?
Don't put your life on hold, guys. Don't put your life on hold, yet be consistent and disciplined. Rest, I think we've spoken a lot here, but don't put your life on hold. This has got to be a part of your life, and then only you'll stay light, then only you'll stay consistent, then only you'll stay disciplined. So I think that's what I would like to tell my students there.
I love it, Sunita. Keep some balance in your life, you'll perform better. And Jeff?
A smart study plan, discipline, and motivation. If you have those 3 things going on with your GMAT prep, you will be successful. You just got to stay the course. It's not a straight path. There's windy roads. But if you know what the end goal looks like and you're focused on it, you will succeed. You're going to have some heartbreaks, but you will succeed in the end. I've seen it a million times with our students.
I love it, you guys. Thank you all for doing this. Thank the 2 people who already had to drop off. Chris Gentry, Manhattan Prep, phenomenal guy. Tech issues today, unfortunately. Tech was not kind to him. Rajat Sandana, co-founder eGMAT. He had to run off to the next booth, so go talk to him. He's got to be around all day here for the GMAT Day events. Sunita Singhvi, verbal expert, GMAT Wiz. You need some verbal. She's lady to call. Jeff Miller, everywhere, multiple job titles, everywhere all at once at Target, Test Prep, Head of Instruction. All 4 of you who, well, the 2 of you can hear me at least. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Charles, for having us.
We'll see you all at the next event.
Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.